Let's talk about focus in the workplace. Udemy did a great research study on focus in the workplace, distractedness in the workplace. And they called it a distracted workforce because that's what they found. Almost 70% of US workers admitted to feeling distracted on the job. 70%. That means only 30% feel engaged and focused. That's a crisis, in my opinion. 16% say they're almost always distracted. And not really surprisingly, we were talking during the break just now about how the younger generation is a little bit more distracted, or a lot more distracted in some instances. Millennials and Gen Zers reported 75% of them, 74%, almost 3/4, say that they're distracted at work. That's huge. 3/4 of young workers and 70% of all workers overall report being distracted in the workplace. And what are the sources of distraction? 80% say chatty coworkers that, hey, can I just come in and talk about your weekend? How are things going? Now, on the one hand, that's part of our interpersonal connection with our coworkers. So we don't want to totally block everybody out, right? But there have to be some rules of engagement, let's say, for when it's okay. So 80% said chatty coworkers were their major source of distraction in the workplace. 70% said office noise, and 61% said open offices, the cubicle environments, having no privacy. Now, if you add those together, if you take the cubicle environment and then you hear other people talking to each other and chatty coworkers, they're all going to work together to create a situation where it's really, really difficult to concentrate. Now, if you look at the youngest workers exclusively, the outcomes are a little bit different. And they're all higher. They're more distractible on every data point. Chatty coworkers, 83% said they're distracted by that. The number 2 reason for the youngest workers was their smartphone, with 69% saying looking at their phone is the second major source of distraction for them. And then for office noise, 66%, so a little bit higher than the general overall average population in the workplace. For this slide, the maroon is using technology for personal reasons in the workplace. And the blue, the teal, is using work-related technology, okay? Tools and techniques for productivity at work. Which is more distracting while at work? For millennials and Gen Z, almost 80% say using it for personal reasons, personal use of technology. Whoa. So it's more evenly split for Gen X, and then the baby boomers are a little bit more distracted by the work-related technology, the productivity tools that they're using in their work environment. Social media, by far, Facebook is the major source of distraction for people. We've gone from an explosion, this just mirrors the explosion of development of the internet, from 7% in 2005. People were using social media, and now it's up to 65%. This is from the American Psychological Association's Stress in America survey. They do it every year, and every year they have a different area of focus. And for this particular year, in 2017, they were focusing a lot on internet and technology. Facebook, by far, was the largest source of distraction, 86%. That's huge. It's actually 6.5 times higher than any of the other forms of social media that they asked about: Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. Now, if you have seen my stress and anxiety release presentation, which I've done, I talked about in that presentation how workers, over 50% of workers reported working 12 or more hours per day, which is, wow, ridiculous. We'll figure out why that is a little bit later in this presentation. But when people are distracted and they're not getting as much done, their workday expands because they're not getting as much done each hour. And then they end up bringing work home with them and checking their technology for work emails throughout the evening and on weekends. So when work bleeds into our home life like that, our home life has to be taken care of at some point in time. So what happens is that our home life then bleeds into our work environment. and we never have downtime, and we never have separation. This is a real problem. So 36% of millennials and Gen Zers reported spending 2 or more hours per day on their phone at work doing personal activities, non-work related activities. That's a quarter of the workday. That is more than 10 hours per week in a supposedly 40-hour work week, working on personal items at work. And 62% reported doing this at least 1 hour per day. That should be really alarming to companies and employers, I think. Switch cost. This was a new term for me years ago when I started doing this work and I started doing this research. Switch cost is how much time and focus and energy and even money is lost for the business by switching activities. Now I'm focusing on this. Now I'm going to change and focus on this. But I'm not quite done with that one, and that one's kind of still bothering me. I've got to go back to that one. Every time we switch, that's called goal switching. And rule activation is the other part that creates the switch cost. And rule activation means every time we change from now I'm thinking about this project to now I'm thinking about this project, there are different things we have to bring to mind. There's a ramp up time of what is involved in this project. I really have to ramp up to the task. And now I'm working on this. And now I want to switch over here. Not only have I switched my goal, but I have to think entirely differently about that different task. I have to think about, what are the rules of engagement, I guess, for that particular project. There's a long ramp-up time every time we switch activities. 4 experiments looked at all sorts of different types of tasks, and they found that for all sorts of different types of tasks, very rote, repetitive ones, and very in-depth, complex, deep thinking ones, participants lost time when switching from one task to another. And the time that they lost increased as the work became more complex, because there were more rules of engagement. There were more things that they had to think about. And the time lost increased the more novel or new that task was. Our neural networks work on repetition. So activities that we're used to doing over and over and over again the neural networks become deeper and wider. It's like when we go hiking in the woods and there's no path there. The first time we go hiking in the woods, we have to really take a machete and create a path. We have to work really hard. The next time we go, maybe we have to clear away some bushes and brush. The next time we're just kind of really cleaning up and we have the beginnings of a path that we can meander on, but it's not really a deep, wide path that's straight yet. And the more we walk that path, the more it becomes a path that's distinguishable as a path. And the more we do that, the wider the path gets. And then eventually people can walk on the path with us. This is a metaphor, this hiking in the woods metaphor, for the way our neural networks work. We need to have repetition to be able to access those tasks quickly. And the ones that are deepest and widest are the ones that are accessed fastest. So the more novel or new a task is, the harder we have to work to ramp up to that task. The harder we have to think. Think about whenever you've started a new eating plan or a new exercise regimen, and it feels really hard for the first 3 or 4 weeks. You have to look up new recipes. You have to figure out new ingredients. You have to figure out where they're sold in the store. It takes a long time to cook it the first time. It's the same thing with any task. So at work, if the tasks are newer and we don't have that deep, wide neural network yet for that task, the longer the ramp-up time is. The researchers estimate that switching tasks may eat up and may cost as much as 40% of our productive time. That's even more than the 25% of time, the 10 out of 40 hours in the work week that I was talking about on the previous slide. So this is called the switch cost. Here's some of the most startling data I want to share with you in this entire presentation. This is what got me hooked on doing this research. This slide is the initial reason for this presentation. People tend to experience interruptions, either from others or self-interruptions, every 10.5 minutes during their day. But look at this. It takes over 23 minutes to ramp back up to the task, to get back into that focus state, to get back into the flow, even following a short minor interruption. In this Udemy study, they found that 84% of workers felt they could refocus within a half an hour, and that's true. That's found to be true. But that means if we're getting interrupted or self-interrupting every 10.5 minutes, and then it takes us 23 minutes to get back in the flow, to get back to where we were before that interruption, that means we're only working productively for 10 minutes out of every half hour of our workday, or 20 minutes per hour. How do you get anything done when about 3 hours of the day is spent ramping up to the task, and you're only working about 5 hours during the day? Well, what people are doing is they're bringing it home and they're working 12 hours a day to get the same amount of work done. This is the piece of information that I read that made me go, oh my goodness, this is going to become a public health crisis, let alone an economic crisis eventually for us. If we lose our ability to focus and have deep, complex thought, we're really in trouble. There's a problem. And it's happening at younger and younger ages. You say you work in a preschool, the number of kids who are being handed cell phones to keep them quiet while their parents talk. Hey, I have done it before. I'm just saying to make that a habit can become a real problem. So what is the impact of distractions on employees? A research study at Michigan State University, which is my alma mater, so I especially like this research. They found that interruptions as short as 2.8 seconds, which is fast, right? That much time, right? Doubled the rate of errors of the participants in the study. So coming back to task, their errors were doubled just by having a 1, 2, that level of interruption. That's the phone buzzing and you going and coming back to task. You're on task, phone buzzes, back to task, error rates doubled. This is kind of a counterexample research study, so I wanted to include it, but I include it for an interesting reason here. The University of California, Irvine, they did a study and found that people are switching tasks every 3 minutes, not every 10.5 minutes. That's even worse. However, they found, surprisingly, that the interrupted tasks were completed in less time with no loss in quality than the non-interrupted tasks, the uninterrupted tasks. And they were very surprised by that, and they delved into the data deeper. And what they found is that people were compensating for the interruption by working faster, okay? And people were reporting higher levels of stress, frustration, mental workload, time pressure. They felt anxious all the time. They were getting their work done. They were getting it done with the same level of quality, but their personal inner feeling of health was seriously suffering. Then they need to go to my stress and anxiety release presentation. So we've got the issue of, we've got to balance focus and our relaxation and stress and response, our calming response. The greater we can focus, the more we accomplish in a shorter amount of time, and the healthier and calmer we feel. So they really actually have a lot to do with each other. 86% of Americans say that they check emails, texts, and social media either constantly or often. And 20%, almost 20% of Americans say that technology is a very significant or somewhat significant source of stress in their lives. We can't completely get rid of it, but we have to figure out ways to manage it and learn ways to cope for our own health. This study actually looked at the stress levels. They rated stress levels from 0 to 10. And those who rated themselves as constant checkers, meaning everything, every time there's a buzz, a beep, they check. They're constantly looking from their computer to their cell phone. Those constant checkers on that 0 to 10 or that 1 to 10 scale had a 5.3 rating for their stress. The average stress of non-constant checkers was a little bit lower at 4.4, actually quite a bit lower. When they looked at the constant checkers who also check their technology on non-work days, at non-work times, in the evenings and weekends, their stress level was a 6, quite a bit higher, significantly higher. And what is the workplace impact? Well, 54% reported that they're not performing as well as they should at work. That's over half. 50% say they're significantly less productive, and 20% feel like it's actually impacting their ability to advance in their career, to get promotions, to reach their full potential.